Cool. Well, I guess we can go ahead and get started. We just want to say thank you to everyone who's joining us tonight for our October monthly member meeting, and a huge thank you to John Jackson for offering to talk to our group about how to tackle the OSCP. John is a senior offensive security consultant and is the founder and former member of Sakura Samurai, a hacking group dedicated to legal hacking. He's most known for multiple CVE and government security research contributions, and his most recent book, Corporate Cybersecurity, Identifying Risks and the Bug Bounty Program. So thank you, John. We're super excited to hear you speak tonight.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Can everyone see okay? Cool. So what we have here is called OSCP roasting. So as everyone knows, the OSCP is kind of the minimum to get started as a pen tester or end up on a red team or something like that. I'm going to go through this kind of quickly because there's a lot to cover. So disclaimer, back when I took the OSCP, it was in 2020, and obviously they've changed a lot since then. They moved to an Active Directory model. And I don't have the 2022 course material, so the presentation is going to be based off principle. I do Active Directory hacking for work, but obviously I can't tell you that what the course material looks like for that particular section, so I'll do the best that I can there. So the most important part of the OSCP is taking notes. I think that's the aspect that a lot of people overlook, but in reality, it's critical to the exam. You're going to feel like you're burning time, especially when you have to backpedal to do an exploit to take notes. But trust me, do it. You don't want to be one of those people that goes back towards the end of the exam and starts taking notes and redoing the exploits, because the reality is you're going to be really tired and you're not going to want to do that. So Joplin, Cherry Tree, whatever you want, just save your time. All right, so here's an example of kind of how I set up. So this is Joplin. I have each target segmented, and with the segmented targets, I have my attempts tab, which is basically everything I've attempted. So that's parameters that I've tried attacks on, interesting looking stuff like input forms or exploits that I've tried, all of that kind of stuff. And then your enumeration should have its own separate tab, and Prevesc should have a separate tab too. Basically, every phase that you're going to go through should have a separate tab, and then just, make notes and take notes and screenshots. So reading the exam guide, this is like probably the most important thing. For instance, if you don't have this in the format they want, you'll fail. So reread it like 10 times. You don't want to be the person that fails because of format. We're not going to really go over that. You can just read the exam guide, but please read that 10 times when you're writing the report or before you take the exam as well. So enumeration. My enumeration flow for the OSCP is different than my workflow, for instance, because open source kind of stuff isn't really a thing on the OSCP. So what you want to do is use Nmap Automator. I like it. It's 2 years old. It still works really well, and I use it every day pretty much. dir search, and I'll explain why, and obviously manual enumeration techniques. So Nmap Automator, why you should use this? Okay, so Nmap Automator uses all of these tools at once. So you don't have to sit there, run NickGo and a num for Linux and all of that. It's completely legal in the exam, and you can run it multiple times. So what I like to do is I like to run Nmap Automator against every target at the same time. And that's essential because by the time you loop back around to another target you want to work on, you already have all the recon. So it's really good. dir search is like amazing. They keep it really up to date compared to other fuzzers like FFUF, which is updated probably 5 months ago or something like that. I believe Nmap Automator uses FFUF, so just use dir search in conjunction with it because you'll get different results, or just whatever fuzzer you want to use. But make sure you're fuzzing web apps, and try to look at ports for services on the web too. So like if you see 8080, you might want to fuzz that as well, stuff like that. All right, manual techniques, hack tricks. So after you go through all the automated stuff, you're going to start to find interesting stuff on like FTP and, or, you know, whatever it may be, SMB. You can go and put in that port number in Hactrix, and you can start to get specific outlines for a wide array of techniques and different versions and stuff like that. And this is amazing because Hactrix is just like, I don't know. I like Hactrix. It's top of the line. I think it's super underrated. A lot of the methodology comes from extremely old school hackers that have been doing this for like 2 or more decades. So I recommend that you use Hactrix when you find interesting services and ports, and you need to go through like the checklist of things that you've checked out. So another underrated technique is using your brain, right? So Hactrix isn't going to teach you the kind of logic and tools you need to exploit things, right? So let's focus on this example. You find an anonymous FTP. You're able to log in, right? An anonymous user, anonymous password. Now, there's no files in the FTP. You know, there's no uploaded files being served on the web. The version looks like it might be vulnerable, but you've tried several different exploits and it's not working. Now what? Well, the question is nothing, or the answer is to that question is nothing, because you don't want to spend a ton of time working on a service that's not even vulnerable, right? So just put it on the back burner. You know, you don't want to just override your logic because you see something that might look vulnerable. It could be vulnerable at a later time. You know, someone can reconfigure the app, but if you can't do anything with it, it might not be worth your time. So exploitation, right? Metasploit rehab, reinventing the wheel, searching GitHub, multiple methods, right? Being smooth, and because that's fast. These are all things that matter and are going to help you on the OSCP. So let's talk about that a little bit. Proper Metasploit. What do I mean by proper Metasploit? Well, contrary to what you're told, Metasploit is an amazing tool. I use it all the time. I think a lot of people that hate Metasploit run it out of the box, don't configure anything, and just expect it to work. That's even with AV bypass and all that kind of stuff. For the OSCP, you can only use it on one system, so don't get used to it. I recommend not letting your gut control you with Metasploit, because you might have this gut feeling that you need to use it, but just trust me, just keep it to like a dire type of situation. Because if a Metasploit module exists for it, a tool exists for it. I promise you, a tool will exist for it if you find it in Metasploit. If not, you can read the code and you can figure it out. And if you don't know how to do that yet, then that's what you should strive to achieve. So definitely use it in practice though, because the methodology is going to be the same between Metasploit and exploits that you pull off GitHub or something like that. And, you know, definitely if you get it to work, you take a look at the overall process for it, because it's going to teach you a lot about different systems for sure. So this is my favorite one. And if there's any slide you remember from this entire thing, please remember this slide. GitHub and searching for exploits. This one word will change your life. So take a look. On the left, you have proxy shell exploit. You got a bunch of news articles. You got one thing with Rapid7, but it's an article, right? It talks about an exploit chain. You can go looking for it. Or you can append GitHub to exploit, and now you have a bunch of exploits. That's what you want at the end of the day. You know, if you take this route where you're typing in the name of the service or application or whatever, you might spend 20 minutes looking through articles just to get to understanding the exploit. Whereas you can hop in here, take a look at a good POC, and have something within minutes. There are a lot of different versions of applications that you may have trouble finding exploits for if you don't do something like type in the name and then exploit on GitHub. And offensive security is like notorious for doing that. Like if I type in the application and the version, I might not find news articles as big as this, right? I might struggle to find a good POC. So This is like the most important slide. All right, fight. So it's your system after all. Take a look at the scenario. So you got an exploit, you use it, it fails. You're certain that this service is vulnerable, right? So what do you do and how do you address this? It's simple. You got to start readdressing the code, right? Are you doing the right thing? Is the code even working? Is it doing what it's intended to do? Do you have to modify it? Offensive security will kind of do this. So, be sure that it's doing what it's intended to do. The other thing is trying different places. There's ExploitDB, there's another GitHub tool. When in doubt, just throw it on the back burner, just call it a day and just move on, because you could come back to it and have a different idea. Offensive security trickery, right? It's just things that offensive security loves to do to make things harder for you. So for one, like I was saying, strive to exploit everything, anything, new things, whatever. If you're like someone that's really good at web app, focus on network, vice versa. If you're good at Linux, focus on Windows. You want to focus where you're weak, because at the end of the day, offensive security is going to find a bunch of stuff that you've probably never seen before. And if you have seen it, I mean, that's great, but it might be like an FTP exploit on a version of FTP that you've never seen or hardly ever used. It might be some SMS messaging service or some database exploit. Like, you have to get familiar with exploiting a wide range of things. And if not, know how to quickly adapt. So they will force your hand to switch to manual exploitation at some point in time. Like, when you go to use a tool, it might just not work straight up. So it's either going to require you to rewrite a part of the script, or you're going to have to use manual exploitation. So get familiar with being as manual as humanly possible. The other thing too is limited tools and exploits. They might give you a vulnerable version of something that has a vulnerability that's well documented but has no exploit on GitHub. And it might be the best thing you can find might be something that talks you through a vulnerable parameter and the vulnerability class type. So be familiar with that and be ready to refactor a little bit of code, although it's never too intense. I guarantee you can find something for it. And then the last thing here is sinkholes. So like login panels that go to nothing, and like I was saying, an anonymous FTP, that kind of stuff. So watch out for sinkholes or rabbit holes, right? So regaining control, it's kind of easy to do. If you find yourself working on the same vulnerability class or type or port service, whatever the case may be, Privesc, for 2 hours, just stop and switch to something else. I promise you, you don't want to keep trying exploits that aren't working. That's why it's vital to have notes. And, if you try an exploit, for instance, against FTP or SSH or MS SQL or something like that, and you try like 3 or 4 different exploits and it's not working, that's why it matters to have those notes and throw them in the attempted, so you don't sit there and try the same exploits over and over again. It's not going to just work just because you're trying it rapidly. So be aware of that. Also be aware of like the small things, right? Like, did you put in the right R port? If it's HTTPS, are you using port 443, or sorry, are you using like SSL, right? Because it could be HTTPS over 8080, but is SSL set to true in the exploit? Especially like with the manual ones, right? They might not handle SSL well, so you got to think about stuff like that. The best method is obviously doing multiple techniques and then just really moving on. So read the code too. If you go into like a web application, and it's like a WordPress or Tomcat or something like that, let's just say, you should be looking at that code, look for the versions, debugging responses, and really just knowing what the application workflow does and if you could really even interact with it. A good way to test this is with Burp Suite. So you pull up Burp Suite on a web app, for instance. Are you getting a response from the server? Like if you use dir search and you find a bunch of credentials and you do a post request, are you actually getting a server-side response? If you're not, no exploit you're going to use is going to work if the vulnerability is something that is going to exploit the server side or be passed to the server side. So you have to think about that. The other thing too is port debugging, right? Like if you're trying an exploit and it doesn't look like it's processing the code, do netcat and use NV and then the IP in the port, or telnet IP port, to see if you're even getting any sort of communication from it, because you might be getting a very limited communication. It might be like just yet another sinkhole. So just be aware of that. All right, search exploit. I don't have to go over this too much, but I just wanted to show you this trick that I use all the time. So if you use search exploit on something and you're looking for an exploit, you can take the exploit number and you can use search exploit -m to pull it down locally, so you don't have to reference the whole path or copy it down, and that'll save you a lot of time. Manual exploitation. I'm primarily focusing this on web apps because I think web app is probably the most underrated, and you're going to end up exploiting web app. I find it highly unlikely that you're going to have OSCP exam where you're doing against all 5 boxes that don't end up using web app to some extent. So I'm just going to cover the baselines. All right, so we got SQL injection. This is the long route. This is the route that people think they need to take. This is using manual fuzzing and testing for errors and doing all that kind of stuff. Don't waste your time going through big SQL injection lists. Instead, you should aspire to identify the software or application and version, right? And then search like a boss, because that will save you a lot of time. So here's a great example. Look at this top picture here. If you type in CodeIgniter 4.2.0 exploit on GitHub, you're not going to see anything that says something about SQL injection. But if you go down here and you throw SQL injection in there, boom, you see SQL. So if you start to see weird queries, or it looks like there's a SQL database on the back end or something like that, or there's like a lot of parameters that's passing SQL queries, just go look up the application name and the version and SQL, and I promise you'll save yourself a lot of time. Now, I'm not saying this will save you unlimited time, because, for instance, if you actually look that up and click that CodeIgniter version right here, the exploit, you'll see which parameters that this person has tested and found to be vulnerable, but it doesn't exactly give you a payload of what you need to use. And with manual SQL, you're going to have to go through and build a query that works to pull like usernames and passwords and stuff like that anyway. So this will at least save you half of that time. So that's something good to do. You can't use SQL map on the OSCP. So just kind of get that out of your head now and start doing it manually. I know it's pretty awful, but that's how it goes, because in the real world, like, everyone uses tools, but you can't do that. So just get used to this way to at least reduce the time in half. Server-side template injection. This is one of my favorites that I see all over the place, but people hardly ever even use it. What is server-side template injection? Well, take a look at this right here, this code. So this is Twig. Twig is like a CMS or something like that. Twig is vulnerable to SSTI if they are not sanitizing parameters. So as you can see here, this hack trick says, hey, if you see, this parameter or something like this on Twig, you can use something like 7x7. And if you get 49 in a response, you have SSTI. This is really good. I highly doubt you're going to see it on the OSCP, but if you do, it's probably like one of the easiest shells, because all you got to do is flip into remote code execution using something like wget and pulling. So basically what you do is you host like a txt file with a PHP shell, use wget to pull it down, use the O to write it, and you're good. Now, what if wget doesn't work? Well, there's certutil, there's bits admin, there's curl, there's a lot of other methods to kind of transfer files. So also make sure before you even start doing stuff like wget that the system has wget to begin with. And yeah, I mean, that's vital. So this is kind of a good way to go about just getting RCE. Hacktricks will have a bunch of different templates and stuff for SSTI. So I love checking parameters for SSTI and for SQL. And I think those are probably two of the best kind of methods for getting quick remote code execution. Directory traversal, this is obvious. I don't really have to go over this one too much, but what you're looking for, just go grab cheat sheets. There's one for Linux, there's one for Windows on GitHub, and just use Burp Suite Community Edition to fuzz it. It's nice and easy. You don't really have to do anything special. And just run through and look for SSH keys, right? Can you log into the SSH with a private key that you nab? Can you log into an FTP now because you have some FTP password or SQL password, stuff like that? And I don't think people talk about this a lot, but custom stuff like PowerShell scripts or Bash scripts with passwords. That's something that is obviously custom to the OS that might help you break into the system elsewhere using like credential reuse. Local file inclusion to remote file inclusion. So this one trips a lot of people up, but this is like a super easy way to get a shell as well. Don't get LFI and LFD confused because a lot of people do. LFI will execute the contents of the file being included, and that's how you end up getting remote file inclusion in most cases, whereas LFD only shows you the contents of the file itself. And that's important because if you have LFD, you're not going to be able to get a reverse shell using like a PHP input or something like that, because you can't abuse that PHP function. So here's some good ones. RFI wrapper expect basic RFI, which just this pulls down a file that has PHP code in a TXT and then renders it, right? So when you go there, boom. And then wrapper input, which this one can be done a few ways. You could do it with Burp Suite, but this curl one-liners are pretty good because you can just put your command right in the middle there where the ID is, and boom, you're good. You could get a reverse shell. However, I think a lot of people that try this give up once they can't catch a reverse shell. Like maybe ID's working, but when you start to throw spaces in there, right, to get that reverse shell, because you know it's a long command, it's not working, like reverse shell one-liners. And to combat that, what you're going to do is you're going to encode it. You know, do URL encoding, base64 encoding. Try different methods of encoding that you can use Hacktricks to kind of go through all those different methods, because if you are getting code execution with a simple command like ID or who am I or something like that, you don't want to just throw it to the wind because you can't get a reverse shell. It probably has to do with your spaces. So encode your command. Application specific access control. So this is actually one of my CVEs that I found a while back, Garak test rail. And basically what they were doing is they have this file called files.md5, and they're exposing all of the different paths on the application and the corresponding MD5 hash. So why this matters? Well, when you go to fuzz a web application, for instance, you might not get everything. And that's because, you know, not every list you have is going to have every single path for that specific application. So if you start to find these weird paths, make sure you're trying them out, because you might end up with an access control based vulnerability, which has just become my specialty in a weird way, and ends up getting applications just straight popped. And then you get a password or something like that that you could use on a service or on a web app, upload a shell, you know, abuse the function if it's something like Jenkins, and you do like a groovy reverse shell or something like that. But those are post-authenticated remote code execution vulnerabilities that you wouldn't have otherwise. So business logic. You can't discover business logic vulnerabilities with tools. This is like the actual workflow of the application. And I love these because there are always things that people are too lazy to try, right? So for instance, you get into you have a registration button for what looks like an admin panel, and you're like, oh, I'm not an admin, I'm not going to try that. No, you should definitely try that registration button, because you might be able to register an admin account, right? And then log in and start doing stuff, get that post authenticated RCE. Or you might just have like regular user credentials, but for whatever reason, that user has a role to change some other account's permissions, and and then pivot to that account, and that account might have some sort of function to get remote code execution. Like custom functionality like that, and business logic flow kind of issues or business logic flaws are, I mean, that's a real thing. So make sure you're checking the workflow, and you can do that by kind of debugging the post and get responses using Burp Suite and see how it interacts, and then also actually using the application yourself. All right, PrivEsk, scripting the win. I'm not going to go through every single one of these scripts, but when it comes to PrivEsk, this is what people struggle with the most, and I know it's what I struggled with for the longest time. But in reality, excuse me, there are so many tools that exist. Like in 2 years, it's absolutely insane. In 2020, there were a decent amount of tools, but nowadays, I mean, these tools pretty much do everything for you, which is, I mean, it's good. It's great. So use them. Power Up, Sharp Up, WinPs, you name it. You should have a baseline familiarity with PowerShell. So using like PowerShell scripts and importing them, but also like compiling executables, because something like Sharp Up, for instance, or broot. I don't know if you have to compile broot, but Sharp Up and Power Up, I think you do. Not exactly sure. You can download the pre-compiled versions, but you can't always depend on those to work. So you should know how to look for the .NET assembly on a Windows system, so you can go and quickly compile a binary to upload custom. Now, offensive security is not going to make you do all that, but if you go to use a tool and you're getting like PowerShell errors or something like that, 99% of the time it has something to do with a missing module or the wrong version of .NET, and you just have to know how to adapt to that. So actually go try these tools out on some systems before taking the OSCP. For Linux, LinP is LinSmart enumeration, broot, pretty much all the same stuff. Manual methodology matters, but scripts can't help you understand how to exploit it at all. So you have to go through and do some courses and get some practice with it. So easy escalation, these are easy wins. GTFO bins for Linux and LOLBAS for Windows are amazing. You can go look that up on a search engine, and I promise you, you will not be disappointed. These things will help you do everything from escape restricted shells to downloading files to exploiting binaries, and I mean, like in 2 or 3 lines, like nothing intense with it at all, like SUIDs and GUIDs and stuff like that. And I rely on these all of the time, because I find more often than not, if I go through GTFO bins, for instance, on Linux, I'm going to end up getting privilege escalation. It's just matter of fact. Yeah, so don't sleep on that. When you get onto Linux, of using things like capabilities, SUIDs and GUIDs, cron jobs, look for binaries running as root that you have permission to modify, right? Because then you can put like bash reverse shell one-liner or something like that. Out of date binaries, that matters too. Like local privilege escalation on sudo, for instance, is a thing. So make sure you're paying attention to the output of linps and winps and looking up exploits and privilege escalation for that. So all you have to do is just go and type in something like sudo 4.9 local privilege escalation GitHub, and I promise you, you're going to find something for it. You just have to know what to look for. Like searching online is probably the most vital part of hacking. It's not really even the hacking, because you can compile a giant list of commands, and one of them is going to work if you just keep trying stuff. Windows is always the same things for me. It's always weak service permissions, uncoded service paths, outdated binaries or unusual binaries, stored passwords, and passing the hash. For unusual binaries, like I'm talking like software that you might not normally see that comes with a Windows machine that you might have to exploit, or there might be like privilege escalation for that specific binary. So what does that mean? And how do you, what are some pro tips for that? So if you get horizontal privilege escalation, you find a password for another user, rerun that methodology 100%. If you don't, you might miss out on something important like permissions that belong to that user that you didn't have before. And that might be the difference between you rooting a machine or not. So don't get lazy, just go through it again and rerun the privesc techniques, including some of the manual ones, because I guarantee you're probably overlooking something. Kernel-based exploitation, they always talk about that in the offensive security material. Don't depend on it. I agree, do not depend on this. Because if you sit there and cross-compile C exploits over and over again and you're just running them, I promise you you're going to end up either crashing the system or it's not going to work and you're going to bury 2 hours. They never really make it that intense with the kernel-based exploitation. However, if you use Metasploit, you're one time and you use like Windows or Windows exploit suggester or exploit suggester in general, it's going to give you a bunch of different kernel exploits and you should use it because Metasploit is better at it than you, I promise. And you'll probably end up privesking because it's just so good at identifying out of date operating systems and going through and matching that to its database of exploits, right? So it's really important. Having a snapshot or a baseline, what do I really mean by that? If you have a Windows machine, go and look at your file list and go and look at the standard directories that come on a Windows install and on a Linux install. That matters because if you don't know what is out of the ordinary, how are you really going to know what to exploit? And that's where offensive security gets you in the privesc. They will, it's hard to really say without giving it away, but most people can tell you by now that a lot of the stuff has to do with exploiting services that are out of the ordinary or programs that are out of the ordinary. So just keep that in mind and have a baseline. Once you look at enough Windows machines and Linux machines, you're going to know what to look for 100%. Scoring. So this is the new scoring system. A lot of you are probably familiar with it. I learned that you do not get partial points on Active Directory at all. It's either all or nothing. So thinking about that, I kind of worked up a strategy here. So you get 20 points per machine, right? On 3 independent targets, and you get that 40 points for owning all of the Active Directory set, 2 clients, 1 DC. What that tells me is this is probably 5 systems total. So here's my point strategy. If you're not lazy and you're an overachiever and you have the extra lab points, the 10 bonus points, you can, if you want, you can do the full exploit of 3 non-Active Directory targets and not even touch the Active Directory. But I don't recommend it. I don't recommend it because that's a trap. They will get you. That is a trap. They're going to give you some obscure application or service and expect you to know how to exploit it. And there's a pretty good chance that you're going to sink a lot of time on it. I really think you should just lock down the 70 points. And I don't think you're going to do it on exploiting and fully rooting all 3 non-AD boxes. What I think you should do instead is full exploit on 1 non-AD box and then move on to the full AD attack chain. I mean, think about that. That's 1 box. That's it. You root a box fully, and you just move on to AD and you start trying to get that full AD chain to get the 70 points. Like that is a way better strategy. Or let's say you're struggling, having a hard time. You could always do the initial exploit on 2 non-AD targets, right? Like maybe you're bad at privesc. You could just do the initial exploit on 2 boxes, grab those local.txts, whatever it takes, which may require horizontal privesc to like another user, and then do the full AD attack chain. Now, if you're not an overachiever, like me, for instance, I mean, I am, but don't get me wrong. I really didn't want to do the lab exercises and all that stuff. And that was a mistake because I didn't get the bonus points and I failed OSCP by 10 points first time around. So if you don't do that, I will say it's not necessarily that you're going to be in a worse place, because you're still going to have to kind of go through this same process or same strategy, in my opinion, because I think they kind of set you up for if you don't use a strategy that touches everything, you're going to fail. That's just my opinion. Maybe you could root all 3 boxes. I don't know. But what I think you should do if you don't have the 10 bonus points is fully exploit 1 box and get privilege escalation, get the local and the proof.txts, and then do an initial exploit on the 1 non-AD target, and then move into a full AD attack chain. When I say that, I mean immediately move into that full AD attack chain, because there would be no purpose at all in going after other boxes if you complete this criteria, because you don't get partial points on the AD. You need to do the whole AD chain, so you might as well do the bare minimum on the 3 boxes and then focus all of your time on the AD chain. All right, Active Directory. Crack map rules. Crack map is awesome. It's crack. So it's really good. Crack map. And I think it's too good. Like, it's probably too good to be true for the OSCP. So since I didn't do the Active Directory portion for the OSCP because it didn't exist, I'm just going to go ahead and say know how to use crack map, but don't gamble and just think that you're gonna win with crack map and passing the hash or using a password to spawn a shell on another box. It might work, it might not work. Just don't gamble on it, but definitely use it as a tool. Impacket's essential, but there's really just honestly too many tools to cover. We don't have enough time here, so just go and look up Impacket and get familiar with it. Enumeration techniques, I like PowerView a lot. I like Mimikatz, but you can only use Mimikatz with local admin access. Don't forget that. Lasagna is really good for gathering credentials. I think it's unlikely you're going to find a bunch of stored browser credentials and stuff, but it might not hurt to use Lasagna. And Bloodhound is overkill for Active Directory with 2 machines. I'm not going to lie to you. I think a lot of things go wrong with Bloodhound if you don't have the proper time to set it up. So unless you're a pro or god at using Bloodhound, I don't recommend using it on the exam. Instead, really just get familiar with all the manual PowerShell commands. If PowerShell breaks, there's an equal and opposite command in like wmike or some other binary that cmd.exe can use. So don't be afraid to really get hands-on with the manual enumeration, because sometimes the tools will gloss over that, and it never hurts to just go through and hit a checklist or hit a cheat sheet of enumeration. So, okay, what happened? So you did all the enumeration, you got the domain name, the forest, all that good stuff. Right now, what? So Rubius, silver tickets, golden tickets, everything tickets, diamond, right? Diamond's new, actually. Kerber roasting, ASF roasting, and overpassing the hash. Those are all techniques that work really well. And I guarantee you, you're probably going to have to use either one of these techniques or the SMB relay attack or something like that on the exam. I couldn't imagine offensive security turning around and requiring you to do like service exploitation or binary exploitation or something like that, or weak permissions on all of the boxes in the Active Directory, both boxes, to get to the DC. I really think they're going to test you on that. I don't have the new course material, but if you see them talking about golden tickets and silver tickets and roasting and Kerber roasting, I promise you they're going to use one of those techniques. So get familiar with it and just go through all of them one by one. Do not do any of this. Like if you actually root a box in your NT authority system, do not try to go doing ticket passing and stuff like that with NT authority system. It is not a domain user. You cannot pass the hash with that. It's not going to work properly. So just don't do it. Use a domain user for it, because you're basically using that user's hash. Don't worry, you have the permissions for it, unless you're not an admin level user. So that's usually a good indicator, right? If you have a basic user and an admin level user, use the admin level user for everything, because things like Mimikatz and all that aren't going to work anyway. And yeah, I mean, that's a really good recommendation for that. SMB relay, I'm not going to get too much into this. I don't really have the time, but you could use a responder with NTLM Relay X. I've used it before. It's great, but you could use crack map exec with credentials to make sure that SMB signing is old and is actually vulnerable. Because if it's not, you're going to waste your time setting up an SMB relay attack, but you'll find it in your enumeration too. So properly enumerate. Avoid DNS poisoning and spoofing, because offensive security does not allow that at all. Like, just turn those options off if you're going to use responder, so you don't accidentally end up like failing yourself or something. And that's why I think it's probably unlikely that you're going to do SMB relay just based off of that alone, right? It's too close to DNS poisoning, because you actually have the options with it, but there's a bunch of other ways you can do it. Weak services, all that, tunneling out with chisel. What do I mean by that? Obviously, weak services. There's so much with that, so we'll get into what you can do for that. But tunneling out with chisel is important. Knowing how to use proxy tunnels is essential for AD exploitation, because then you could run crack map exec, and then you could run all of these different things and interact with the machines directly. Because the Active Directory machines, the second and third machines, like the second machine you go from the initial one with, and the DC, you're not going to be able to hit with your tools. So you're going to want to proxy and establish that tunnel that Kali can interact with. So learning how to do that is essential. I can't stress that enough. And then applying the same Prevesc methodology that plus share enumeration, which is extremely underrated. Do share enumeration. Try to see if you could access shares without credentials, because you might find passwords and useful stuff, etc. Or you might be able to even exploit binaries on the share by uploading it remotely if you can do it unauthenticated, which gets you insta shell. So here's a possible OSCP strategy of something that I might recommend, right? Do a full exploit on an AD target, and then root it, and then do an initial exploit on another non-AD target to get the 30 points. Then you can gain initial access to that AD machine, go through all of your tooling and enumeration. And if you can, because this is really important, if you can acquire an AD user password or hash for a user, and that, don't get me wrong, that might require full privilege escalation. Like, you might have to be NT authority system to end up finding yourself with a domain user hash that's connected, and then end up using something like crack map exec to pass that hash, and trying to use stuff like ps exec. I mean, those are absolutely crucial. Crack map exec can also handle MS SQL, and which is amazing, and a lot of people don't know that. So if you end up finding SQL credentials for a SQL server that is on another box, use crack map exec with those SQL credentials to try to get remote code execution. Like, that's another thing that you can do that a lot of people don't think about. SMB might not work, so try WinRM. Go through all the methods if you have credentials or hashes, because you could use both. I recommend, when you finally get privilege escalation on that first box, and I guarantee you it's probably something very basic like weak service exploitation, or a binary that's out of date that has an exploit for it. When you're on that second box, that's when I recommend you blow your Metasploit. The reason why I think you should do that is because the first box is not gonna, you're not gonna be able to, it's unlikely you're gonna be able to get a shell from that first box to the DC. That's just it's not going to happen. Offensive security is not going to make it that easy for you. So the second box is kind of a good place to go, because there's a good chance that there might be a domain admin sitting within that system, whether it be through like a ticket, right? Something that you can, a ticket that you could get for a service and end up doing a silver ticket attack. It might be credentials for a domain admin or a user that can access the DC, and you end up doing something like Kerber roasting. And a lot of these things are made easier when you have Metasploit on that system. So you can use Windows Exploit Suggester to basically get immediate privilege escalation. And then boom, you're done. You can start looking around for a domain admin that you can take over, because once you take over that domain admin account or user that has an account on the DC, even if it's a low-level user or something like that, then you can use Metasploit's kind of built-in functionality, like Mimikatz, and you can use Mimikatz to grab these hashes, and then you don't have to upload it or anything like that. You just use it straight through Metasploit. And there's all of the post enumeration modules. So what you do is you just background the shell, and then you just start loading in post exploitation modules that you know are likely to help you get access as another higher level user. Because NT authority system is great, but NT authority system is good for doing stuff like logon passwords. Like once you become NT authority system, that's when you start using stuff like Mimikatz and in conjunction with logon passwords to attempt to dump hashes, using W digest to try to get the plain text credentials, using Mimikatz to try to dump the SAM, right? Because you can exploit the SAM. So all these different ways. But yeah, that's what I would recommend. Save your Metasploit for the second AD box. That's my official on record recommendation, because I don't think you need it to get full privilege escalation on one box. I really don't. And then if it's a domain admin and has decent privs, you could run it through like crackmap exec with the password, because you could change the password of the account if you want. I mean, if it's your account, right? You could run like a net user command. So it's pretty useful to do that. But this is really important. Don't use Metasploit directly to pass the hash or do anything like that to the DC, because you'll fail, because that's technically using Metasploit on another box. Instead, once you get NT authority system, you gather credentials for other users, whatever it is you did to end up making it to a domain user that has access to the DC or a domain admin. What you're going to want to do is kind of drop off of that Metasploit, use MSF, or not MSF Venom, but use just make a binary or upload netcat or something like that, or use a PowerShell one-liner to get a reverse shell to your main system that you're going to work off of. Or you could use crackmap exec if you want on that second box. So from the first box, with your proxy tunnel, use crackmap exec on the second box with the credentials to end up getting like a reverse shell as that user. That is not using Metasploit. Like don't mess that up, because that's an easy way to fail if you try to interact and extend past that one box. And then X-free RDP. A lot of people don't even think about this or even know this, but X-free RDP you can pass a hash with that. So if you have a hash, you can pass a hash with it, especially if it's proxy connected, and get a GUI based session. And this is really helpful, because if you don't want to sit there on the command line and you're better like as a visual type of person, you can go and start querying shares. You can look through Active Directory enumeration on the server, like because Windows Server 2012 or whatever the case, 2016, 2022, whatever they're using, has built-in functions for you to query the Active Directory. So take advantage of it and use it. Or, when it comes to like tunneling, like if you don't want to tunnel, you could always use X-free RDP and try to do different exploit methodology like login or RDP into that DC. So if they allow that, I don't know. This is just what I have done in the past that has worked for me. So yeah, it's easier said than done, but you'll figure it out if you put in the time. So resources, try HackMe Active Directory rooms. There's always plenty of practice machines for Active Directory there. I'm actually astounded by how much Active Directory practice they have in Try HackMe for free right now. I didn't know that. It's been so long since I've been on Try HackMe, but they have like fully built out AD labs that will show you how to do everything manually using Chisel, how to pivot, all that kind of stuff. So definitely do it. The Cyber Mentors, Privesk, Windows, and Linux courses are essential. You should take those. Do not sleep on that. It's so cheap. Go to his website and buy them and learn how to do all of those by hand Priv-esque techniques, like capabilities and all that good stuff. And then lastly, set up a mock course. So pick 5 random boxes from Hack the Box. You might have to do a little research. This might be out of date, like the boxes. There might be better ones for Active Directory, but it won't hurt to practice this. But you can go through and you can just set up 5 boxes, set aside 24 hours and just run through it as if it was the OSCP, right? Can you root all these boxes? Can you give yourself 70 points, right? Quote unquote. Yeah. And I mean, those are pretty much all of the ways that you could go about practicing. I mean, there's Pen Test Lab now. There's Pen Test Academy. There's YouTube videos that are crazy, write-ups that are crazy, but you need to be doing all of those different things. Hack the Box is something that you should use to practice like you play, but I don't think from the jump, it's a good method of practicing. You should go through and actually practice boxes that are a little more realistic, because sometimes Hack the Box is very needle in the haystack, right? Like you got to find some random file and decode it from base 64. Like you're not gonna have to do that on OSCP. It's highly unlikely. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Any questions?
This is really good,
That was
John. Thank you.
awesome.
Thank you for coming. My name's Jen. I've been in the industry for a couple of years working as like a junior pen tester, and I have GPen, a couple other things, and probably like a lot of people, I really want my OSCP. I really, really, really want it bad. My first company paid for the class, and I was so green. You know, I made it through the class, kicked my ass. I didn't get much time in the labs before I ran out of time, and I left there. And I think the next company will pay for it when I'm ready. I guess I'm just kind of realized for the first time after taking GPen and other things is that the OSCP curriculum doesn't really prepare you enough for the test. You need to know, I feel like a lot of other knowledge base before you actually go in and do it. So how does somebody go do that? I mean, I see Hack the Box, you know, I see IPSEC videos, and I'm just sort of a little overwhelmed. Like, what's realistic? I really want it bad. So it's not like a motivation is not the problem. It's like, where do I start and what do I do? And holy crap,
Sure.
you know.
Yeah, no, I totally feel you. I actually felt just like you're feeling right now. In fact, probably even worse, because the only options I had when I started this hacking journey like 5 years ago was Hack the Box, right? And
Yeah.
this was in a time where people would like cuss you out if you tried to ask for help.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like it was pretty bad. Like you're not I think a lot of people will tell you, do not look at Hack the Box write-ups. You'll never learn a thing. No. I totally think for retired boxes, you should look at write-ups when you get stuck, just enough to get unstuck and then keep going. And then when you get stuck, follow the 2-hour methodology and then get unstuck again. Why?
Okay.
Because you're learning. That's actually how you learn. And I think Try Hack Me has blown Hack the Box out of the water
I
in
agree.
terms of learning. That's what I recommend, because I have never seen so many relevant boxes through Try Hack Me. or sorry, I haven't seen relevant boxes through like Hack the Box as I've seen on like Try Hack Me. Try
Okay.
Hack Me has like so many relevant examples. They'll focus on CVEs, you know, they'll focus on specific technologies, and they'll show you a lot of like precursory stuff and what you need to know to get up to the point of exploiting it. And I think that matters a lot. You know, they give you tons of hints basically.
Yeah.
And they give you examples that make more sense than, hey, pull this random file and start like decrypting it and use this PFX certificate. No, you're not gonna do any of that on OSCP. Definitely use Try Hack Me for practice, and definitely take advantage of the OSCP labs. And
Yeah.
then for
Okay.
more material, the Cyber Mentor for sure. Like
Yeah.
that Privesk stuff will
So
change your
good.
life. It will teach. Yeah, exactly. That Privesk stuff will actually like legitimately change your outlook on your approach for sure. So.
Yeah, thank you. So helpful. And so like kind of a follow-on question, and I'm sure the people might have questions, but so how many of these like Try Hack Me, Hack the Box would you think you be doing until you're ready to jump back in the OSCP lab time? Because it is kind of expensive, and not, I don't know how much help I'm going to get. I don't know. I might get some help from the guys in the team once I get in there. I'm not totally sure how they do it, but like, I don't know. And you're probably talking to a typical population like us, where we're constantly getting ready. We're constantly getting degrees. We're constantly preparing to prepare. We don't really go and do stuff. I feel like we, as a population, women, I don't know, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but we just are constantly preparing. So I don't want to be too afraid of it either. Like, at what point do you jump into the labs and go for it?
So I think I took the labs far too early. I was not ready for it. I actually found myself really overwhelmed at the time, because you're doing these scans, right? But how do you establish the methodology other than just like running an Nmap scan, right? And looking at these services and the methodology. Like, you're not going to learn the methodology that you need unless you practice it, right?
Right.
It's so hard to just go and Google a name of an application and find an exploit for it and start using it. And offensive security is really brutal when it comes to like that lab environment. And that's why I think you should go through the Try Hack Me offensive security path.
Okay.
And the AD path. They now have that AD path. I think both of those paths cover a pretty good range of technologies and techniques between those two. So
Okay.
like the offensive security one will cover like, I mean, I don't want to spoil it for anyone. So I would say it covers a lot of techniques that you'll see on the exam. Well, I mean, I can never really tell you that, but like it covers the methodology that you'll see on the exam. And if you go and do the offensive security path, the AD path, and then the privilege escalation stuff by TCM,
Yep.
I promise you'll get in the labs, OSCP labs, and you'll start wrecking. You'll do really good.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I love TCM. I mean, when I first discovered TCM in the middle of my first job, and I was like, oh, look, someone wrote down like everything we do. We're doing this. And I didn't get it from GPen or even offensive security. Offensive security stuff was like, oh, I wonder what this is, very, academic.
Yeah.
So it is a nice mix. I do think Try Hack Me and TCM has I feel like have changed the
And there's
landscape.
the JPT too. So junior
Oh, okay. Yeah.
penetration testing, the JE or the EP, what is it?
Yeah.
EJPT?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I don't know.
That one is really good because it's like a precursor OSCP.
Okay,
Like,
that would be helpful. That would be good.
yeah. So check that out. eLearn Security EJPT.
Okay.
It's really good because it'll actually have you like write a pen test report and do all that and go through the methodology of like getting in. I think it's good. It's good stuff. And it fills that gap, right? That from nothing to mountain, which
Right,
is what the
exactly.
OSCP kind of feels like.
It does. All right, that's super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions? Looks like we have a couple in the chat here, or one in the chat. Yep, looks like that's got answered. So the YouTube to reference. I mean, I can give the slides to anyone that wants it, I guess. We can figure that part out.
Typically too, just for the WiCyS members that are here, it looks like we have some new folks, so welcome. Thank you for coming. My name is Liz. I think you met Kristen earlier. We're the two co-presidents of WiCyS Military. Super excited for John to be here. Typically, if you're on our mailing list, a couple days after we have our meetings here, we'll send out like a thank you email, thank you for coming, with a list of all the resources. So we'll probably screenshot that slide so that all those resources there will be right in the email for you guys to take a look at.
And let me, just to help out too, let me throw a couple things in the chat that you're going to want to take with you. That will just teach you so much. And just give you good resources in general too. So hold on. All right. Who hates typing out the reverse shell command one-liners? Boom, there you go. That will change your life. If you're not using that, you should be using that. That is absolutely life-changing and will save you so much time of typing in reverse shell one-liners, Java reverse shell one-liner, .war, MSF Venom payload one-liner. Don't want. And then this is an Active Directory. I don't even know what to call it. Just, it's on another level. It's got more stuff than you can probably use or see in a lifetime, which is good for preparation, but be very careful with the tools, right? Make sure that the tools aren't doing anything that's impersonating, like spoofing, right? Or doing DNS attacks or anything like that's prohibited on the exam. Those two resources are amazing. I've obviously got more, but they're just not, they're not relevant for the OSCP, for instance, like bypassing AV and stuff like that. You don't need to do that on the OSCP. So yeah. Any other questions? I know it takes time, so don't forget that it's not going to happen in a day. Just to make you feel better, I've quit hacking. Like within the first 2 years I started hacking, I quit on and off for a couple months over and over again because I kept getting mad at myself. People kept trolling me, right? Like when I'm trying to get help, they're like, look at this guy, right? He's asking me how to trigger a web shell. And I'm like, what? I don't know. Like, what do I don't get it. It's not working. I uploaded it. I didn't catch a session, right? Like I didn't know.
I have one that's not necessarily test related, but we all know like OSCP is not necessarily like reflective of what you do in like your regular day to day. So
Sure.
can you like walk people through what you do as an offensive security engineer?
Sure. So I started when I started at the company I'm working at, I did a lot of pen test, web app pen tests. And you'll find that when you start working as a pen tester, a lot of your day in, day out is web app pen testing. And I think this discourages people a lot because a lot of the times your client will restrict your scope and give you like one URL and say, hey, here's some static WordPress site that we have or run, try to break in. And then you have to spend time with it trying to look for vulnerabilities. And for the most part, it's going to be very difficult because after you kind of run through looking at the version and seeing if it's, out of date and all that, if it's not out of date, a lot of it's going to be looking for like header issues. And I think that's very discouraging. And I know when I first started, it was brutal. I was like, man, this is so stupid. They gave me one URL. How am I supposed to do anything? I've spent so much time. And that, I think people need to understand that's a precursor to getting to do cooler stuff, right? Because once you start to establish a rapport with your company, they're going to be like, hey, we have this physical pen test. What do you think? You want to go do some red team, right? Hey, we have this vishing exercise. Do you want to try to trick people into running payloads, right? Or giving you documents? hey, we have this red team assessment, and do you want to be on the red team, right? Like, you start moving up. I think there's a lot less spots for red teamers than there are like application pen tests, but I just do red teaming full time now. So you will get into doing a lot cooler stuff, or occasionally you'll get a bunch of domains or subnets, and they'll be like, hey, here's a web app pen test any subdomain that you find. And that's always a lot of fun, right? Because that's when you can like do a lot of crazier stuff, like AMAS to grab all the subdomains, resolve them, parse them through Aquatone, get all the ports, and then use nuclei to find like low hanging fruit, and then start finding weird looking apps and start having fun. I recommend when you do get into like pen testing and you get your first job as a pen tester, that you push the client a little bit. Like, you're a consultant. Push the client to give you a little more wiggle room, right? If they give you one URL or one website, say something like, hey, or wildcards in scope for this URL, right? Like, for instance, maybe the web application has a login dot whatever, admin dot. Now, I'm not saying take the root URL and find all the subdomains for a giant company that has 8,000 like different subdomains. Don't do that. But if it's a smaller application and you're running Burp Suite or something like that, and you see a bunch of subdomains pop up, maybe like 3 or 4, like 3 to 5, ask if you can include them in the scope, because it'll help you find bigger impact, right? You could chain vulnerabilities together, CSRF and all that good stuff. So don't be afraid to just tell the client what you need, or post authenticated exploits. We always ask for credentials, because if they're testing their application, what does it look like when I'm logged in, right? Can I abuse it? For the chat, my MOS was not networking or cyber in the Marine Corps. I was a bulk fuel specialist, a POG. So petroleum engineer.
I think it's so funny that you mentioned that, because we get that question all the time. I think a lot of us who are sort of in cyber, we're like, oh, what did you do when in the military? What is, how was that relevant to what you're doing now? And unfortunately, I worked with computers a lot, so I could say, oh yeah, I worked with Linux machines, no problem. But I think a lot of people are like, yeah, no, I was like an LS, or I was working on the flight deck, refueling jets and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So we have so much diversity in this scope of cyber that I think it's great that we get people from all over the place.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, they look at my journey, and they look at where I am now, and they just make a lot of assumptions about my job or what it took to get there. But the reality is a lot. I mean, it's a lot crazier than what people think, right? Like, I didn't know anything about computers at all 5 years ago. Like, I didn't even know how to open or really mess with Excel documents 5 years ago. So if that gives you a little bit of perspective into how possible it is to become a hacker, at least a moderate hacker, I wouldn't say I'm world's best anything, but yeah, you can learn a lot in a little bit of time if you structure it and you don't just throw spaghetti at a wall type of deal. So.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that about the web. I kind of got lucky. I started at a little junior pen testing thing that was Windows Active Directory on small and medium-sized businesses. And then I left there. It wasn't perfect. It was not a good fit. So I left there and then ended up at a bigger company where I'm doing web and more web. And it's just like you said, there's just not a ton. It is super boring. And you're like, oh, your cookies should be secure and everything. Like, you write the report. So I'm moving on within there and moving on to some other things, I think. But yeah, that's good to know. It seems like there's a ton of work in AppSec right now, and I just don't like it. So
you have to embrace application security and web app hacking, and the reason you have to is because people mess up bad. Developers mess up bad on web apps, and I mean like disgustingly bad, to where you do something so simple and end up with remote code execution. I would say, when I compare myself to a lot of other people in hacking expertise, a lot of them are really good at network hacking, But the reason I avoid that is because companies, and I don't avoid it, don't get me wrong. It's just more or less like when you actually look at a server, so many times you go and you pull the IP addresses and subnet ranges and you're like Cloudflare, 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 right? Like you're
Yeah.
trying to do a network pen test and you're like, oh my God, I can't exploit this because everything's behind Cloudflare. I'm trying to pull the real IP and I can't do it, right? So what option do you have when the network asset is behind a CDN, or like you have to use a web app to pass malicious queries or malicious functions to bypass WAFs and to bypass CDNs and stuff like that. Another trick that I always tell people is when you're doing network hacking, when you're doing web app hacking, it's rare that you can sneak network hacking in there and be like, hey, I was looking at the FTP port, and they get mad, right? But on the inverse, for network hacking, you can totally use web apps.
Yeah.
So yeah, when you're doing network
get it.
hacking, don't just focus on like SMB and stuff like that, because that's low hanging fruit. Everyone knows that. They're gonna try to prevent that, but you know what they're not ready for? Someone to find their Fortinet that's out of date, right? That's running on some random port. They're not ready for that.
Yeah, it's good to know both. I feel like I know a little bit about a lot of things, but nothing very well. So it's when you're going through what you went through the last hour, I'm like, I have religion and everything. it just is overwhelming, and but I'm gonna go through the try hack me that you mentioned and go from there.
Yeah.
Because you don't
just
always,
take
even
your
when
time.
you're working as a pen tester, you don't always encounter all this stuff. It's just
Yeah.
not much. It's more you're becoming an expert in Excel and Word.
Look, I'm not saying do crime. No, I'm joking. get your hands in some I hate to say it, don't do bug bounty like that. Like vulnerability disclosure is a great way to practice, because VDPs, since they don't pay, they don't really secure things as quickly, and you'll find yourself across a very large range of assets. So look for like VDP programs that have wildcards and just go ham. And that's like such a great way to use to learn a lot of different services. Like for instance, I got really, I wouldn't say good, but I got decent or mediocre at web app hacking when I started doing VDPs when I made Sakura Samurai. And 99% of the time I would pop a company, it was because of something stupid on a web app, like a Tomcat, right? And I upload a .war payload, or I popped the United Nations because I found GitHub credentials in a file on the client side. We popped Fermi Labs because of access control issues. We popped the Indian government in many, many, many ways. And like, if you ever have the time, go look that up. That was all like web app. We're finding credentials for SQL servers. We're finding credentials for applications where you could upload stuff. We're finding like old Tomcat stuff. So yeah, VDPs are kind of a good way to get hands-on, like with realistic environments as well. Bug bounty is not, because they harden it 10 times more.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Mary's got a question.
Hi, I'm glad to be here. I'm still a student. First of all, I apologize for coming in late, and so when I came in, I was lost the entire time. This is my dream.
It's okay.
I'm not there yet, but this is exciting and is what I think I want to do. I believe I want to do. What is your advice for someone I haven't even started yet. I don't even know like a start point for me. So what
I'm gonna give you something that's gonna change your life. One sec. The Cyber Mentor. I'm gonna give you a course that is like from boot to root, straight up. And this is like everyone that doesn't really have any experience at all with hacking. Like if you have zero experience, or you have very limited experience, just go and take this course. It's $30. It's not very expensive, and it's life-changing. Like trying to compile resources, especially when you're starting from the ground up, is I mean, if you want to talk about the mountain, that's the real mountain, is actually like, okay, learning all the terminology, like getting virtual machines spun up and doing all that stuff. Like, I can't tell you the amount of really stupid things I did when I first started hacking in terms of like setting up my environment. Like, I went on a forums, I don't even remember which one it was, and was trying to get networking help for VMs, because VMs were not like as intuitive as they are like 5 years ago, because I'd like slap up a VM, right? I couldn't get an internet connection, right? Like, if you don't understand networking, you don't understand basic security and stuff like that, it's kind of tough. So if that turns out being too hard for you, take it a step back and go do Network Plus and Security Plus. There's free courses on YouTube from Professor Messer, and he will teach you the way of networking and the way of security. And like, that is super vital if you don't understand things like ports and stuff. If the word port is foreign to you, you might have a tough time, right? So maybe do like the Network Plus course for free, because you'll learn all of those concepts.
Yeah, I'm taking a network class. I'm presently taking a network
Perfect.
plus class now, and I'm also doing like the cyber security analyst course too. So I mean, I'm getting
Perfect.
familiar. I haven't gotten to the level where you all are, but so it's exciting. Thank you so much for this the resource. I appreciate it.
No problem. I'd say you're probably ready for that course for sure. Any other questions? Cool. Well,
Sweet.
thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And I hope
Yeah.
this was helpful.
Thanks for donating so much of your time for our group. We really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thanks so much,
no
Jen.
problem.
And don't
Yep.
forget, if you haven't seen the chat, the recording should be up on our WiCyS Military YouTube channel very shortly. So keep tabs on it if you want to relook at some of those slides.
Closing thought. You got this. No matter what step you're at in the hacking process, you're gonna feel dumb. I feel dumb every single day with hacking. Like, I'm terrible some days. You know, some days I wake up, I don't hack anything. You know, I just jam away trying to hack something. So, you know, don't feel like you're alone and that you have no resources and that you don't understand it, because I promise you, something just like clicks where you just start to understand more and more over time, enough time doing it. Like, it sounds foreign now, but you'll get there. Cool.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. Have a
Really
great night,
good.
everyone.
Thanks again.
Thanks, WiCyS,
Thanks,
for putting this on.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.